Hello, hello. Welcome back to Adobe Live. Once again, I'm in a new hotel room. This time it's actually an apartment. Still in Japan, although no longer in Tokyo. I'm in Osaka today, and we are going to be going through a crash course on an introduction to coding in After Effects, or rather using expressions. So a way to customize how you want to animate things and make adjustments purely in After Effects using coding. I'm going to try and keep this as beginner friendly as possible. This is a crash course after all. This is going to be 45 minutes, and I will run through how we can get started with stuff. If you want to join in with the chat, by the way, come and head over to behance.net/live with the currently active live stream. We stream multiple times a week. So throughout the month, you'll get streams in French, in English, in German. This week is the English week, and we've got Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, a 3-part series for Urban Nights. So the second part will be following this stream. And likewise, yours truly will be doing some crash courses before those. So today we've got After Effects, and tomorrow we've got some InDesign. So already Tim is in the chat asking, the question is, where will I be tomorrow? Well, I'm likely to be here still, I think, possibly with a bit of an updated setup. I'm going to be testing a few things because I am launching these streams myself, and it's been a bit of a learning curve, but a good one nonetheless. So I know Tim is going to be watching with a beady eye to make sure that everything's working fine, because Tim is the one who normally runs the magic behind this show. Tim, if you can let me know in the chat, I'm going to try some good old background music, and let's get this going. So let me know if this is perhaps a little too loud, and we can stop it. But otherwise, I think this is going to be nice and chill. And interestingly, I definitely can't hear the background music. But anyway, let me know just how it's going. I can see Oliver in the chat as well, just saying, I reckon Joe's at home using a green screen. You know what? That is actually an idea that I've had for a long time, is to take a photo of my regular setup at home and then just travel with a green screen and pretend that I'm at home. And with a microphone like this, I think we can get away with it pretty well. Okay, so Tim is saying music could be a little bit quieter. Let's just drop it down. In fact, I can't even hear with this earphone, so let's not even wear that. Cool. So today we're going to be going through After Effects, and let's jump over to our screen share, and here we go. And make sure I've got the chat still active so I can see yourselves all nice and friendly there. Cool. So in After Effects, as you'll probably know, you can edit and animate all sorts of objects, text, color, graphics, a variety of things to your motion pictures, your video stuff. So one thing that you may not be completely aware of is that you can actually customize how these graphics are made using code. And it's a way to, as we're running with the theme of efficiency this week, is the way to streamline your workflow and make things smoother and more, consistent for future things. So if we have a look at what we've got here on my screen, this is just an example of what we're working towards. So it's going to be a very simple title here, that as we change the length of the text, your background base is going to be changing. Likewise, we can have some different color options that we can change here, and some potential other options for styling and creating a custom version of your titles. So over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to show you an introduction into how you can create something like this that is very flexible and easy to use. So let's go. Not sure if the volume changed. You know what? Let's just change. Let's stop the music. Let's focus on After Effects. Alrighty. So let's jump over into a new composition. So I'm just going to go here, and let's call this one Adobe Live, and Let's make it 4K. 5 seconds is long enough for me. That's all good. And yeah, let's go into some rulers. So first of all, I like to get things nice and central. So I'm just going to pay attention to my y-axis in the top. What do I need here? So I need 1080. That is half of the 4K resolution. And I need to zoom in a little bit just so that I can get this accurate. So I'm just paying attention to the info module over here. And we want 1080. There we go. Come on. Oh my God. Trackpad. There we go. 1080 and 2048 because I'm working in DCI 4K resolution. So now we have our central point as our guides, and within, let's just close that one. Within our composition, I'm just going to start with some text. So let's just make this a little bit larger, and let's set this to 50% view. So we're going to create some text, and let's just jump and let me lock my guides, make sure, yep, guides are locked, so I'm not going to click and accidentally change those. And let's just add a title here. So we've got our title set. I've got my favorite font that I'm using from Adobe Fonts, and we've got a size, center aligned, that's perfect for me. And let's just adjust, and I managed to click that slap bang in the center. Well done me. So we got our title, and I'm gonna just move this down into the center position across the x-axis there, and we're gonna create a new shape, which is gonna be a rectangle. No need for a stroke, and I'm just gonna draw a box. Any particular size really doesn't matter hugely. And let's just tap enter to rename this, and I'm going to call this one text base and drop it below our title. Cool. So we have our box, and for the ease of demonstration, I'm actually going to drag into my essential graphics panel over here just our text as our source text. So this way, if I need to change anything, I can just do it directly from the essential graphics. So any sort of value that you can do within your layer stack here, you can drag it into your essential graphics, and you can then make your adjustments and changes. It's just a quicker way than double typing in here and typing a new title, for example. You see that's now updated in my essential graphics. So from here, I just find this is a quicker process to go, and it's easier to then just quickly jump back and forth without double clicking and accidentally moving your layers around and all sorts. So the first thing we'll notice is, of course, we've changed our title, but that background base color hasn't adjusted in any shape or form. So let's jump into our first little bit of coding. So I'm going to open my text base over here. By the way, I can't stop hearing bass in my head, like bass, as in music. I don't know why. So we open up the base, and if we go into our size option, hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows, and click on the stopwatch. You see that that has now just twirled down and opened up this little area here. This is where we code in After Effects. And so from here, we can create some parameters, and we can start to manipulate how things look using code. Don't be scared by this, okay? I know it sounds intimidating to start coding and to do, you know, all sorts of entering the matrix when it comes to this. I'm going to keep this very simple, and we're going to work in a very basic manner. So we've opened up our expression panel, and I can actually drag to make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to show how you can achieve a coded result by working backwards. So first of all, we need to know what do we need as an end result. This is how I like to problem solve a lot of coding things, is I start with my end result, and then I work out how to achieve that with code. So in this size parameter, After Effects is expecting an X value and a Y value. That's going to be our dimensions, the width and the height of this box. And the way that it's looking to hear that is in what's called an array, which is 2 square brackets, okay? So anything that's in a square bracket is an array, and you can have a number of values. In this case, is looking for 2 values separated by a comma. So we'll have value 1, and I can actually just type in here. So let's say value 1 we're going to put as 200, and this is in pixels. And value 2, the height, this is going to be also in pixels, 200 and 100. Cool. And as soon as I click away from that, you can see it's now updated. And so After Effects is no longer taking the shape of the box based on how I drew it, but rather it's taking what I've got in this expression here. And you see that it's active because it's red text down there. Apologies if that's a little bit small. After Effects has quite a complex interface, and so I kind of need to see a lot of things at once. So the resolution is a little bit higher than usual on this. Anyway, so with these dimensions, I can of course change things. I could go to 800 as my width, and let's try 300 as my height. And now you see it's updated the box based on that. But we want to work with dynamic values. We don't want to work with just fixed values. That's not really coding. That's just using code to implement a manual thing. It's not really doing what we want to do. So let's now work backwards. So we know that this first value is going to be our X value. So I'm going to give this what's known as a variable. So I'm going to type here, and I'm going to call this one base width. And then our Y value is going to be the base height. This is something I just made up. It's not any particular code. It's not anything specific within After Effects or anything like that, or in JavaScript, which is the language you use for coding. This is a variable that I've just created. And of course, if I click off, it doesn't know what to do with it because these are variables that I've made. They're not anything that it knows. And we've got a little exclamation mark here that if we double click on, it will tell us error at line 1 in the property size. Base width is not defined. Okay, cool. So let's define base width. So if we go back into here, and I'm just going to add a few returns. So we know that our array always has to be the last element in this code. This is what the final output is going to be. So we're working towards achieving that. So first of all, base width, base height. So what is base width? So let's now define base width. And you see that as I start typing, it auto-completes. And Kirsty's also put in the chat that the code doesn't have to be completely spelt right because it will help you with autocomplete, which is great. So our base width, and I can just double click on there, equals, and we can now set a variable, a value. So let's set my value as 800, and let's end the line with a semicolon. You don't always have to do that, but it's good practice to use a semicolon. It just tells your code that your line is finished, because code actually goes indefinitely across. In fact, it may not be indefinitely. It could be a fixed number of characters, but it'll be in the thousands. It doesn't just auto-wrap like a text document does. And so adding that semicolon just says, cool, this line is done. Let's jump to the next one. And let's now add our base height. And let's give this a value of 300, which we had before. And now if we click away, our exclamation mark has gone, and our size is back to the 800 by 300. Because what we've got here is our first value, base width equals 800, and then we implement it in that array at the end to say base width is whatever we've typed up here. So if I change this value, it updates that array. So we're starting to work with code here. We're starting to use things to actually make something implemented. And we can start to manipulate this a bit further. So it could be that in our array, maybe I do base width asterisk 2. In other words, multiply by 2. So now this value here, 1200, is actually going to make it 2400. So you start to understand that these coding things can open up so many more possibilities, and you can start to reference things way beyond them just being simple numbers. Oliver saying your base is not fat enough. Fat with a PH, for sure. So our base width, our base height, we want to start to work dynamically based on the text that we're working with. So before we can go any further, I'm actually going to start to comment my code. This, again, is good practice because you'll help your future self when you come back and you look over your code and you say, what on earth was I typing here? You can add your comment with a double / and we can do set base dimensions. And so you see that with this being green text, our comment is now visible for us to read. It's not going to affect the code in any way because of those 2 /. Okay. So again, working backwards, let's now jump up to the top and let's now take our text width and try to add that into our code. So now we want to do our source text. Okay. So I'm going to go text _ width. And again, this is a variable that I've just made up. I just typed it. They have to be connected, so you can't have any spaces, which is why I use underscores. You could even do a single character if you wanted to, but I think from a basic level, it's good practice to write things out as simply as you can understand. Don't try and be efficient with your coding at this stage, because you're just going to make things muddly, and muddly is not even a word. You're just gonna muddy it up, and you're gonna confuse yourself later down the line. So keep your variables in plain English, and you'll thank yourself. So text width, and again we've done equals because we're going to give it a value. Now I can use my pick whip over here, and I can actually just drag and drop it onto my title layer. And now what it's doing is it's implemented this code straight into my expressions here, and it's saying the text width is a value from this composition, and then it's got a full stop here, or a period, which just adds on extra values. So within this composition, we're now looking within the layer, which is called quicker currently. If I happen to update this layer name, our code auto updates, which is brilliant. And then I'm going to add an extra value here that I'm looking for. So at the moment, text width is just grabbing everything about that layer, but I don't want that. So I'm going to add a full stop. I'm going to do width, and then semicolon just to end our line, just to know that we know what we're doing. And let's do again for our text height. And I can just copy and paste this, or I could use my pick whip again. And this time we're going to use height. You see that height and width, they're both listed as yellow, and they're coming up as autocomplete. That's because these are values from After Effects. And so that is actually going to be grabbing some data from this file and layers. So now we have our text width and our text height. And I can change this value here to just be my text width. So now this variable, my base width, is equal to my other variable, my text width. And likewise, my height could also be the same. And so now what we're doing is we're setting our text and our shape layer based upon the text layer, which is great, except for one thing. This has now implemented it across the whole layer, whereas we actually want just the text value. So in order to do that, what we want to do is we want to add an extra value within this width. Okay, so at the moment we're looking at the layer and then the full width, but we want to add an extra detail in there, which is the source rect at time. And we can add a time, just 0 frames. That's good. And we can add again in here. And then make sure you got your full stop. So now what this has done is, rather than taking the overall layer width, it's taking just the source pixels from within that layer. Okay, so think of this as the data within the layer, whereas previously, without this source rect at time, we were taking just the overall layer. And of course, the overall layer is set to our composition size. So we want just the pixel data within that. So it's a key thing to just always be aware of, to make sure that you don't forget. And it will probably be quite obvious when you have forgotten it, as it will show up pretty large there. Okay. So for ease of everything, I'm just going to move this into the center. We could start to go into coding our position, our anchor point, but we've got limited time, so I'm actually just going to manually set that, and we'll just leave this as is, and make sure we've got our anchor position. Actually, let's just leave that. That's fine. Okay. So now we're taking our text width and we're setting our base dimensions to the width of that text. So therefore, if I change this text to a much longer piece of text, you see our box now fits exactly to the width of that, which is great. It's exactly what we're looking for. But I want to stylize it a little bit more. I want to do something more than just have the width exactly as it is. So I'm going to add in my base dimensions, I'm going to add a new variable. I'm going to call this one padding. And for my padding, again, I could just add my own value. So 160 pixels, for example. And in fact, I'm actually going to put this above so that it's can reference, because code always goes from the top down. If something is being referenced and it's actually referencing from something ahead in the text, it won't understand where it is. So whenever you're going to use something in code, make sure it's always been written beforehand for when you need to use it. A little bit like the layer stack in Photoshop. Things on top are always the most visible, and you've just got to work your way top down. So I've added in my padding as a variable here. And now for my base width, I'm taking the text width, and I'm just going to do a plus padding times 2. Okay, let's put these in parentheses so it does that first. And then for my height, I'm just going to do plus padding. So what that's going to do is it's going to add 320 pixels, so our padding times 2 for the width, and then 160 pixels extra for the height. If we click away, now you see that our box has been amplified, slightly larger, simply because we've added that padding. And if I change this padding value to, say, something more, we can increase this more. But again, we don't necessarily want to use just a fixed value here. How about we use the text height divided by 2, so half the height, as our padding. And now we've got a comfortable looking thing just based on the size of the text. So therefore, if I happen to change my font size as well, our box is going to grow with it as well. Whereas previously, because it was a set value of 160 pixels, changing the font size wouldn't have affected anything to do with our box. But because we're using a dynamic piece of code to adjust our box size, things start to become more and more flexible. So the idea of how I like to approach a lot of coding things is I never really want to do a fixed value. I always want to have the value connected in some way to something else, because as one thing updates, another thing may update, and it may just concatenate all together and make a great seamless workflow. As soon as you start putting fixed values in there, things can start to fall apart and go wrong, especially as you start to scale things. So we've got our padding, we've got our base width, we've got our base height, and our end result, which I'm going to add a comment here to output values. So this is our end result that ends up here. Perfect. So we've got our setup on our title and our background text. Let's now start to work with something a little bit more complex with our coding. And I'm hoping that with this particular stream, it's a very basic introduction into coding that can just spark enough of an insight that you'll go off and run away with things. For me, that's how I got involved in coding and development for websites and everything. It was all down to just making a connection between HTML and CSS through quite literally a 15-minute workshop that I then ran away with it and went and learned a whole load of other coding languages and other things. And so this little spark, I'm hoping, will lead to many things with you. So let's show a little bit more of a complex thing with coding, but don't worry, this is still very much beginner friendly. Okay, so we've got our text base, and that just shows as a background thing. But let's say we want to stylize it in a particular way. So I'm going to actually create a new layer. I'm going to go to a null object, and I'm just going to call this one local adjustments. And I'm going to put it to the top of my layer stack. I'm actually just going to rename this one to title so that it's easy and organized in our layer stack. Okay, so in our local adjustments, this layer is doing nothing. It's just a layer, and it's a layer that I can add things to and interact with. Let's do a quick save as we are. And from my layer, my null object, I'm going to add an effect. I'm going to add an expression control. I'm going to go to drop-down menu control. That just adds a new effect down here, drop-down menu. And again, I can just hit return and rename this. I'm going to call this one style. And in our menu here, let's just edit our items. So we're going to call this one full base. And then underline base. And then let's go no base as an option. If I wanted to, I could add more menu items just with the plus here, but we don't need that. 3 I'm happy with. So full base, underline base, and no base. And let's just drag our menu into our essential graphics. And I like to capitalize that. Don't ask me why. I just like it. Okay, so we have our menu selected, and currently if we change our options between full base, underline base, and no base, it does nothing because our code is not looking for any changes here. So let's jump back to our text base, and we have our size here. And now we're going to start to reference using some if commands. So we're going to question with our code. If something over here is happening, then do something over here. And this is a very common logic in all sorts of coding applications where you do if, else, do something. Okay? So before we add to our base dimensions, which is kind of one of the last steps of this line of code, I'm going to add a section in here. Let's give it a comment, and we're going to do it style. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to get the base style. So that's a variable that I've just made up again, base underscore style. And we're going to use our pick whip to drag it onto the menu. Now, a quick tip here is if you hold Option when you drag onto the menu, what it does is it finds that particular item, that effect, and it indices. It does it with an index, so your count of your effects. The reason this is kind of important is because if ever your titles end up being opened or saved as motion graphics templates and opened in an application that's running in a different language, for example, sometimes when I package up my titles that I sell myself, they may be used on computers running in German or in Spanish or in French or something like that. And so using this index value, which is where it's referencing that menu, the first menu in this list, it means it can work across all languages. If I didn't do the option and I just used the pick whip and selected just our menu, you see it adds the word menu. It's a little bit frustrating that that's a thing because menu isn't the same in all languages. So to get around that, just hold Option. I think it's good practice to have when you're pick whipping to various things, and it will work fluidly across all your languages. Okay, so let's jump onto our next line with a semicolon. So the style. Oh, I deleted my variable name. Let's just give that again. Base style equals the value from this menu, okay? So now what we want to do is we want to find out which style is active. So we're gathering the information in this base style of what is in this menu. So if I change this menu to underline base, it's going to change the value in that variable, in that base style. And if I change it to no base, it's going to change it again. And so we want to extract that data and work with it. So there are a number of ways of doing this. And to demonstrate it, I'm going to show you in a simple format. I'm going to say up front, this is not an efficient way of coding. There are far simpler ways of doing this in a single line of code, but I think that's going to be a little bit too advanced here. So I'm going to write it out that makes sure that it's as easy to understand as possible. So within our output values, we're going to start to question things with an if. So we can just quite simply type if, and then we need parentheses, which just says, what is our question? So anything in these parentheses, this is what we're questioning. So we're saying if base style, and then we're doing a double equals, which I think of as equal to. If our base style equal to 1, and this is the first value in the menu. Okay, so we can get our values by going back to our menu and hitting edit, and we can see then numerical here. We've got number 1, number 2, number 3. So we're saying if our base value is number 1, and then we do curly brackets, then do this, okay? So if our question, then result. So if our base style is equal to 1, I'm actually going to copy this, then this is our output. So all of the code that we've done before, it's going to output it, but it will only ever output it if our base style is set to 1. So it's done nothing at all because we are, of course, set to 1. But now if we change our base to something else, you see we get an error because we haven't defined what to do when the menu's set to 2. It's having a panic. It says, you've only told me what to do when you've set menu to 1. What do I do when menu's at 2? So let's jump back to our code. And there are a couple of ways that we can go about this. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing. It's off the bottom of the screen. Thanks for the heads up on that. Okay, let's just jump this down. And let's make the window a little bit larger. Hopefully you can see this. That should be better. Cool. All right, apologies for that. So if our base style is set to 1, then output these results in this array. But what do we do for everything else? Well, we can just type in else, and we do our curly brackets again. And quite literally, I'm going to put the same value because we're working with the same array. And so if the menu's set to 1, do this. If it's set to 2, then still do this because I've changed nothing about the code. But within our base width and our base height, on our menu style 1, I'm going to start to manipulate things. So, let's do it when it's not set to 1. So our base width, let's set it to divided by, actually no, that's fine. Let's do our height divided by 3. Okay, so now we can see full base uses this value that we've created in our code. Underline base, because it's not menu number 1, uses our second line, our else. And in our else, we're asking for the base height to actually be a third of what we've previously said. So I've got my underline base here. And no base is exactly the same as our underline because all we're doing is specifying for menu 1, and everything else, so that's menu 2, menu 3, and any others that I add, are going to be using the all else option in our if command. So that's one way of going about things. But we can also be a little bit more specific. So instead of using else, I could do else if, and I could add the same question, but this time else if base style equals 2, then we set that value. But now we've not done anything for base number 3 or menu number 3. So you got options here for if, else if, or you could just continue to write out multiple if commands if you want. So let's just do another else if, and else if base style equals 3. Then I'm actually just gonna set this to 0 and 0. So magical maths, multiply anything by 0 and it equals 0. So when we set menu number 3, no base, you'll see that our base actually disappears entirely. And when we set it to full base, we've got our full option here. Underline base is a slither of its value, and we could then work to position that and move it down if we wanted to. And no base is completely nothing at all. Great. So we've now created our output values, and they've got different settings depending on what we're working with. So it's a good practice here to code it, because already we've added, how many is that? 6 lines of code, and it's a little bit messy. So let's add menu 1, which I'm calling, full base. And we can do menu 2, which is underline. In fact, for consistency, I'm going to put my comments within the actual if value itself. And then menu 3 is no base. Okay, so now we've got our comments and we have our values here. You can add spacing wherever you need, as long as you don't break the punctuation that's already been auto added to you for your code. You can add space wherever you need it. So make it as comfortable and as flexible as possible, or keep it nice and tight and very cozy. It's completely up to you. Oliver's asked, does this support else if? And then asked too soon. So absolutely. And does After Effects have switch statements like JavaScript does? Yes. So I'm going to say that that's a little bit too advanced to what we're looking for in today's beginner look into coding. But essentially a switch statement is where you can have a single line of code that says if this, do that, else do that. Doesn't work in the sense of if you've got multiple menu options as we've got here. But yes, After Effects runs all of its coding on JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, you're in a good place to start coding in After Effects. All right, so we got about 5 minutes left. Let's jump and add something fun here. So let's go back to our full base. And in our text base, I can just close down the contents. And let's make this back down here. Now let's start to work with some color. Where are my effects, please? Do I need to scroll up? Here we go, effects. So let's add some fill. That's fill the color, not Philip. So we've add some fill, drag that into my essential graphics, and I'm going to call this one base color. Brackets fill. So let's just change the color of our text. Let's go for something that looks like this. And now I want to use some code to try and implement a text color change based off of the value of that text base color. I feel like that was a palindrome the way I just said that sentence. Okay, so let's jump to our text layer this time. And let's also add a Philip to our title. And we're going to set our color here as standard just to white. But we're going to option click on color. And now we're going to code within our color. Okay, so our value that it's looking for here can be a number of different things. It could be an RGB value, a hex value, an HSL value, just different ways of doing color. At the moment, it's just taking what we've got as a swatch here, but let's add in our array, and then let's do FFF, FFF, which is just pure white. Do I need to add? Is it not an array? It's not an array. Oh, okay. Mine's gone blank here. Hex to RGB. That's what we want. So FFF, FFF. So pure white. If we wanted pure black, it would be all the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's always a 6 character value. So in our code here, the end result, we're going to work with a hex value to an RGB, and this is what we're looking for. But this is also what we're going to change as a dynamic. So let's now, again, work in reverse. And first of all, we're going to get our base color. So base color equals, and I'm going to use the pick whip, equals our fill color from the other layer. Okay, so that's our fill color. And now we're going to do a quick question of if, parentheses, base color is equal to something, then we'll do an output. But first, we just want to convert that base color. There's a thing which is RGB to HSL. Base color underscore HSL equals RGB to HSL. Base color. Okay, just working very quickly here to add in. We've got 1 minute left before we jump to the next live stream. Oh, can I do this? If base color underscore HSL using our array. Sorry, we're getting a bit advanced here now. Our third value, our luminosity, hue, saturation, luminosity, that's what HSL is greater than 50. Then we want to do hex to RGB as a black piece of text. Else, we want to do hex to RGB as a white piece of text. Please say this works. Yes. So this quick line of code is taking our base color from our base background, and then it's converting, which is an RGB value, into an HSL value. This is built into After Effects. Taking that base color and converting it to an HSL. I'm then searching through my if command to say, if the luminosity value, which is the third value in the HSL, is greater than 50, so 50% luminosity, then set our color of our base to, set the color of the text to white or black even. If our luminosity of the base color is quite dark, is less than 50%, then set the text color to white. So now if I change this to a much brighter thing, it doesn't work. Oh, I've missed a step here. But to save timing on this, just because I think we may be running out of time on here, this is a quick example of the type of thing that you can get with your coding. And I use this in plenty of my titles and other things so that no matter what color you set your base value, then the text will always be legible, because it will either be white on a dark background or it'll be dark text on a light background. And so through coding, you can do that with your After Effects expressions. And Oliver is mentioning in the chat, the ban hammer is coming, so we have to be careful. We don't overstep the mark on the next Behance stream. But I hope this has been interesting and a big sort of spark of encouragement to go and start coding in After Effects. I took just the tiniest little bit of knowledge and inspiration and completely ran with it a few years back. And now all of my titles and everything that I work with, they are incredibly heavily coded, and it makes life very complex, but so much easier in the long run. So I hope this has inspired you, and I look forward to catching you in another stream super soon. So I'll be back tomorrow at, what would it be, 11 a.m. UK time with an InDesign crash course going through paragraph styles. But in the meantime, coming up in about 10 minutes time, we've got the part 2 of Urban Nights over on Behance, which is going to be a 90-minute masterclass. It's a 3-part series. It's already gone off to a great start with yesterday's stream, and looking forward to more today. And of course, part 3 will be tomorrow. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate you hanging out today, and we will see you super soon. Bye-bye.